I didn't recognize him at first. That's what I keep coming back to. My mother's funeral, standing there in the receiving line like some kind of automaton, shaking hands and accepting condolences from people whose faces blurred together, and then there he was, Miguel, wearing a suit that was too big in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves, the kind of ill-fitting that screams borrowed, and I felt something crack open inside my chest that I'd been holding closed for 7 years. He stood at the back of the line, waiting, not pushing forward, not trying to catch my eye, just waiting with that same patience he'd always had, the kind that used to drive me crazy when we were younger. I watched him while pretending to listen to Mrs. Henderson tell me for the 3rd time how sorry she was, how my mother was such a light in the community, and all I could think was, why is Miguel here? Why now, after all this time, after everything? The last time I'd seen him, I was 22 years old, and absolutely certain I was making the right decision. It was the week before I left for Boston for the consulting job that was supposed to be my ticket out, my proof that I was more than just the Wilson boy from the farm outside Cedar Falls, Iowa. We'd been sitting in his truck, parked down by the creek where we'd spent so many nights that summer, and I'd told him I couldn't do this anymore, couldn't do us, that it wasn't going anywhere, that we wanted different things, that I needed to focus on my career. All lies, of course. What I really meant was that I was terrified of what it meant to love him, to be seen loving him in a town where the Wilsons had been respected for 4 generations, terrified of my mother finding out, of the disappointment I imagined I'd see in her eyes, terrified of choosing a life that felt real over a life that felt safe. Miguel had just nodded, didn't argue, didn't beg. He'd looked at me with those dark eyes that always seemed to see more than I wanted them to, and he'd said, "Okay, if that's what you need." Then he'd driven me home, and I'd spent the next 7 years trying to convince myself I'd made the right choice. Now here he was, moving up the line, and I realized my hands were shaking. My Aunt Rachel was handling most of the greetings now, sensing maybe that I was reaching my limit, but when Miguel got to me, she stepped back. Maybe she remembered him. He'd worked on our farm for 3 summers, after all. Maybe she saw something in my face. "Miguel," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "You came." He nodded. "Of course I came. Your mother, she was always kind to me." "I'm so sorry, James." It was the way he said my name. Not the clipped professional James I'd become in Boston, but the softer version, the one that remembered who I used to be. I felt my throat tighten, felt all the careful control I'd maintained through 3 days of funeral arrangements and family obligations start to slip. "Thank you," I managed. "That means a lot." There was so much more I wanted to say. The line behind him was long, and people were waiting, and this wasn't the time or place. But he seemed to understand. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder just once, and then he moved on into the church, and I had to turn back to the next person, and the next, and the next. The service was beautiful. Everyone said so. The pastor spoke about my mother's generosity, her involvement in the church, her devotion to the farm that had been in our family since my great-grandfather broke the prairie. People shared stories, laughed through tears, sang the hymns she'd loved. I sat in the front pew between my father and my sister, and I kept looking back to where Miguel sat near the rear, and I thought about all the things my mother had never known about me, except maybe she had known. That's what I started wondering as I sat there, listening to people talk about her wisdom, her kindness, her ability to see the best in everyone. My mother had never been stupid, she'd never been blind. And Miguel had come to our house dozens of times that last summer, had stayed for dinner, had helped with projects around the farm that weren't technically his responsibility. She'd always made extra food, always made sure he felt welcome, always asked about his family, his plans, his dreams. Had she known? Had she seen what I was too afraid to name? And if she had, What had she thought about it? About me? I'd never gotten to ask her. That's what hit me as they lowered her casket into the ground, as my father stood there looking like he'd aged 10 years in a week, as my sister held his arm and cried into his shoulder. I'd never gotten to ask my mother if she'd known, if she'd understood, if she would have loved me anyway. I'd spent 7 years in Boston building a life that looked successful on paper, dating women I felt nothing for, climbing a corporate ladder that left me feeling empty, and I'd never once been honest with her, never given her the chance to know her real son. The reception was at our house. The farm had been my mother's pride. The big white farmhouse with the wraparound porch, the red barn my great-grandfather built, the fields stretching out in every direction. People filled the rooms, eating casseroles and potato salad, telling more stories, offering more condolences. I moved through it all like a ghost, and I kept losing track of Miguel in the crowd. I found him eventually, out on the back porch, looking at the barn. He'd taken off the suit jacket, and the white shirt underneath fit him better, showed the way his shoulders had filled out since I'd last seen him. He'd always been strong, built from actual work rather than gym memberships, and something about seeing him there on my family's land made my chest ache. I stepped out beside him. The screen door banged shut behind me, and he glanced over. "Hell of a day," he said quietly. "Yeah." I leaned against the porch railing. "Thanks for coming." "Really?" He nodded, looked back at the barn. "I almost didn't. Wasn't sure if you'd want me here." "Why wouldn't I?" He gave me a look then, one that said we both knew the answer to that question. "Come on, James, it's been 7 years. You made it pretty clear you wanted a clean break." That stung, even though it was fair. I had wanted a clean break. I'd cut off all contact, blocked his number, deleted him from social media. I'd done everything I could to pretend that summer had never happened, that what we'd had wasn't real. "I was an idiot," I said. Miguel didn't disagree. He just stood there looking at the land, and after a moment he said, "She knew. You know, your mother." My heart stopped. "What?" "She knew about us, about you. She pulled me aside once, that last summer, asked me if I was being careful, if I understood that things were complicated for you, told me she hoped I'd be patient with you, that you needed time to figure things out." I couldn't breathe. "She said that?" Miguel nodded. "She said she wanted you to be happy. Really happy, not just successful. She said sometimes those were different things." I had to sit down. There was a bench on the porch, the one my mother used to sit on in the evenings, watching the sunset, and I sank onto it. Miguel stayed where he was for a moment, then came and sat beside me. Not too close, respecting boundaries that maybe didn't need to exist anymore. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Back then, why didn't you tell me she knew? Would it have changed anything? You were so sure about leaving, about what you needed to do. I figured if you wanted to stay, you'd stay. Telling you your mother knew, that would have just been one more thing to feel guilty about." He was right. God, he was right. If I'd known back then, I probably would have left anyway, just carried the guilt with me to Boston, added it to all the other weight I was carrying. "I wasted so much time," I said. 7 years, Miguel. 7 years in Boston, pretending to be someone I'm not, dating people I didn't care about, working a job that pays well but makes me miserable. And for what? To prove something to people who didn't need me to prove anything? Miguel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're here now, for the funeral. I have to go back next week, settle things with my job." "Do you?" The question hung there between us. Simple, direct. "Do you have to go back?" Did I? What was waiting for me in Boston besides an apartment that never felt like home, colleagues I'd never let get close, a life that looked good on Instagram but felt hollow at 3 in the morning? "My father needs help with the farm," I said slowly. My sister lives in Chicago, has her own life. I'm the one with the agriculture degree I never used. I'm the one who actually knows how to run this place. So stay. It's not that simple. Why not? Because I burned everything down when I left. Because I hurt you. Because I don't know if I can just come back and pick up where we left off. Like the last 7 years didn't happen. Miguel turned to look at me then. Really look at me. I'm not asking you to pick up where we left off, James. That version of us doesn't exist anymore. We're different people now. I'm asking if you want to figure out who we could be now. If you're ready to stop running. Inside, I could hear the murmur of voices, people sharing memories of my mother. Outside, the sun was starting to set over the fields, painting everything gold and amber. This land, this place, it was in my blood in a way that Boston never would be. And Miguel, sitting here beside me in a borrowed suit, he was the only person who'd ever made me feel like I could be myself. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. I don't know how to be the person I should have been 7 years ago. Then don't be that person. Be who you are now. That's all I'm asking. We sat there as the sun sank lower, as the voices inside gradually began to fade as people started leaving. My father would need me soon, would need help saying goodbye to everyone, would need his son to be strong. But for just a few more minutes, I let myself sit here with Miguel, let myself imagine what it might be like to stay, to help my father run the farm, to rebuild a life here in the place I'd run from, with the person I'd run from. Will you stay? I asked. For dinner, I mean, after everyone leaves, just you and me and my dad. We could talk, really talk. Miguel smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him all day. Yeah, he said, I can stay. It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't even a promise of tomorrow, but it was a start, and maybe that was enough. Maybe after 7 years of running, of hiding, of being afraid, I was finally ready to stop. Ready to see what life could look like if I was brave enough to be honest. With my father, with this town, with myself. My mother had known. She'd known, and she'd wanted me to be happy, and she'd never gotten to see me figure that out. That was a grief I'd carry forever. But maybe the best way to honor her was to finally let myself be the person she'd always hoped I could be. The person who was brave enough to love who he loved, to live where he belonged, to build something real instead of something that just looked good from the outside. I stood up and Miguel stood with me. Inside, I could hear my father's voice thanking people for coming. It was time to go back in, to finish out this day, to take the next step. But before I did, I looked at Miguel, really looked at him, and I said, I'm glad you came. In the borrowed suit and everything. He laughed, a soft sound that I'd forgotten I missed. It's my cousin's suit. He got married last year. I figured your mother deserved better than my work clothes. She would have loved that you came at all. She always liked you. I know. She told me once, that last summer, said I was good for you, said she hoped you'd figure that out someday. Turns out she was right. Usually was, from what I remember. We went inside together and my father looked up as we entered. He'd met Miguel before, of course, had hired him for those summers, but he looked at him now with new eyes, seeing maybe what my mother had seen. There was a question in his face, one I wasn't quite ready to answer yet, but I would be. Soon. For now, it was enough to move through the rest of the evening with Miguel there, helping clean up, talking with my father about the farm, about what needed to be done, about the season ahead. It was enough to see the way he fit here, the way he'd always fit here, in a way I'd been too scared to acknowledge. Later, after the last guests had left and my father had gone to bed, Miguel and I sat on the front porch steps, looking up at the stars. They were brighter here than they ever were in Boston, uncountable and vast. I'm going to stay, I said. I'm going to quit my job, move back, help my dad. I don't know what that means for us. if there even is an us, but I'm going to stay. Miguel didn't say anything for a moment. Then, okay? Just okay? What do you want me to say, James? That I've been waiting 7 years for you to come back? That I never moved on, never dated anyone else, just pined away for you like some tragic hero? Did you date anyone else? Yeah, I did. Couple people. Nothing that stuck, but I tried. I live my life. I'm not the same person I was at 23 either. Good, I said, and I meant it. That's good. We sat there in comfortable silence, and I thought about the future, about learning to run the farm properly, about rebuilding my relationship with my father, about becoming part of this community again, but this time as my real self. It was terrifying. It was also the first thing that had felt right in 7 years. I'm going to screw this up, I said. Fair warning. I'm going to be bad at this, at being back, at being honest, at whatever this is between us. I'm going to panic and doubt and probably try to run again. Probably, Miguel agreed. But maybe this time you'll have a reason to stay. What reason? He looked at me then, and in his eyes I saw patience and hope, and something that might have been love, or might become love, given time. Figure it out, he said. That's your homework. I laughed, surprised by the sound. Homework? You always were good at homework. Terrible at the stuff that actually mattered, but great at homework. Fair enough. We stayed out there until the cold drove us inside. Until Miguel said he should head home. Until we stood by his truck, the same one from 7 years ago, held together with determination and prayer. He didn't kiss me goodbye. We weren't there yet. But he squeezed my hand, just once, and said he'd see me around, and I believed him. I watched his taillights disappear down the long driveway, then went inside to the house that was now mine and my father's, the house my mother had filled with love and patience and wisdom. I thought about her, about the conversation she'd had with Miguel that I'd never known about all the ways she'd tried to tell me it was okay to be myself. I'm going to try, Mom, I whispered to the empty kitchen. I'm going to try to be brave. I'm going to try to be happy. I'm sorry it took so long. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting, like I was waiting for whatever came next. And for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't afraid of the answer.